So once again, in a experiment, we can interrogate the validity of the experiment with our four validities: construct validity, external validity, statistical validity, internal validity, right? So consider construct validity, right? Which is the question of how well were these variables measured, and do they really measure the thing that they're supposed to measure? For our dependent variables, those are the ones that we measure, right? We can ask the same questions about when we measured variables in frequency claims and association claims. So the story there is the same. For independent variables, though the story gets a bit more complex, right? The ones that we manipulate. Do we manipulate them properly, and does the way that we manipulate them reflect the construct that is supposed to be manipulated, right? So now the question goes the other way. It's the same question, but it kind of goes the other way around. Often that's straightforward. Remember the study about the pen and paper notes versus the laptop notes, right? That pretty much manipulates what it's supposed to manipulate, right? Students taking notes on a laptop versus students taking notes with pen and paper. But consider, for instance, the following. What if we wanted to study the effect of mood, happy versus grumpy, let's say, on task performance, right? So we have some kind of task and we want to investigate whether a happy mood causes a better task performance. So we put people in a happy mood or a grumpy mood and then give them a task to perform, and we see whether people who are put in a happy mood are better at the task than people who are put in a grumpy mood. Okay, so how are we going to manipulate mood? I don't know if you can hear that. My cat's crying in the background. Anyway, how are we going to put people in a happy or a grumpy mood? Well, let's say that we use music. Right, let's take as people wait in the waiting room, we play a piece of music, either a happy piece of music to put people in a happy mood, and maybe a atonal, abrasive piece of music to put people in a grumpy mood, and then we have them do that task. How do we know that people who listen to the happy piece of music really are in a happy mood, and people who listen to the abrasive atonal piece of music are really in a grumpy mood? Well, there's several ways to do that. One is to do what's called a manipulation check. In addition to our task performance being our dependent variable, we can also give participants an additional mood questionnaire just to double check that our manipulation worked, that the people who listened to the happy piece of music really are in a happy mood, and the people who listened to the abrasive atonal music really are in a grumpy mood. Okay, so that's called a manipulation check, an additional dependent variable to see if our manipulation really worked. In our example, that would be a mood questionnaire. Side note, I know of one study with children that used a piece by John Coltrane as to put them in a grumpy mood. That's very sort of atonal jazz, very abstract and melody free, if you like, so children can process it really. I know when I was a grad student, so like 20 years ago, someone also did one of my colleagues who studied social psychology also did a mood manipulation where she used different pieces of music, and the one that she used to put people in a grumpy mood was by a group called Skinny Puppy. Anyway, so if you want to be grumpy, you can listen to John Coltrane, which is like atonal jazz, or Skinny Puppy, which is sort of abrasive instrumental, not instrumental, what's the word? Industrial. Abrasive industrial type music. For your consideration. I don't even know what I used as happy music. Another thing that we could do is what are called pilot studies. Brief, where we do an experiment to test whether our mood manipulation works, right? Or so we can verify whether some kind of manipulation works and then use the results of our pilot study in our actual study. Side note, let's say that we do one of these mood manipulation studies, right? And we use a piece of happy music. Let's say we use Mozart, all right? And we put a piece of grumpy music. Let's say that we use a Skinny Puppy, right? Now let's say that we have someone who really likes Skinny Puppy and is put in a good mood, or someone who really despises Mozart and is put in a bad mood, because of our manipulation, right? So in other words, the manipulation doesn't do what we want it to do. Are we now justified scientifically to remove that individual from our data analysis? So again, we want to put people in a happy or bad mood. We use music for that. A happy piece of Mozart to put people in a good mood, and an abrasive piece by Skinny Puppy to put people in a in a grumpy mood. Let's say that there's someone for whom this mood manipulation didn't work. Are we now justified in removing that person from the analysis? Well, contrary to what you may think, the answer is actually yes. Why? Keep in mind, this is our independent variable. Mood is our independent variable, right? The one that we want to manipulate. We want to test the effect of a positive mood on task performance compared to the effect of a bad mood on task performance. The piece of music was just a tool to manipulate mood. If the tool doesn't work, then for a particular subject, then yes, we can remove that subject from the analysis. We can't, right? If we have a group of people, the idea is to have a group of people in a happy mood, compare those to a group of people in a grumpy mood. We can't just put a person who's in a grumpy mood with the happy people or the other way around. I hope that makes sense. So yes, we can remove that subject from the analysis. Now, obviously, if a person, we can't exclude people based on their score on the dependent variable. That would violate scientific principles, right? If we have a subject who doesn't conform to our hypothesis with regards to the dependent variable, that would be unscientific. But to test the effects of moods on task performance, if we have one person for whom the mood manipulation didn't work, then yes, we can exclude them. In addition, remember that experiments are supposed to test theories. So when we interrogate the construct validity of the independent variable, right, it has to be manipulated in a way that reflects the theory. So, for instance, remember that study with the note-taking versus for the note-taking on laptop versus note-taking on pen and paper. Right? The theory was that when you take notes with pen and paper, then you process more because you think harder on what you write down. Whereas on laptop, the researchers hypothesized you are more inclined to take notes verbatim, and so you don't process as much. So in order to test that theory, the researchers did an additional test of measuring what exactly people wrote down, and evaluated the degree, comparing between laptop notes and handwritten notes, and evaluating the degree to which it was verbatim versus a non-direct transcript, right? And so indeed, it turns out that that was the case, that people on laptop were much more likely to make notes that were verbatim rather than in their own words, right? Or another example from the chocolate tasting study, right? Remember, the theory said that sharing an experience makes a good experience even better. It also said that sharing a bad experience makes it even worse. So those researchers did a study where the people shared extremely bitter chocolate and then had it rated, and they shared it versus not shared it. And that study indeed found that when it was shared, people rated the chocolate lower than when it wasn't shared. It was extremely bitter, right? So you manipulate a variable in different ways to reflect the theory that it's supposed to test. What about external validity? Remember, the degree of external validity is the degree to which we can generalize the result of the study, right? So one way of generalizing is to other people, to other groups of people. Is our sample representative of the population that it's drawn from? Those concerns are similar to for frequency claims and association claims, right? Also, can we generalize to other situations, to other species, and so forth? But here too, the independent variable has to be manipulated in a way that reflects perhaps other situations. Example. Let's say that I wanted to test the effect of temperature on task performance, and I put some people in a room where it's, 95 degrees, and I put some people in a room where it's 60 degrees. A totally made up example, right? And I find a difference in task performance. Well, can I from that generalize to temperatures in between? Do I assume that if there's a difference, that difference is just linear? No, we can't, because those two temperatures are just so extreme, right? Who the hell performs tasks in those kinds of temperatures? Well, people who work outside maybe, but the rest of us seek a more comfortable temperature inside, right? That's somewhere in between those. So in that case, the answer would be no. Does it make sense? So the independent variable too has to be manipulated in a way that is representative of other situations.